Everyone. Welcome to Book Passage and welcome to one of our virtual events. This is being pre-recorded and it's going to be on our website, so you can watch this at any time. This is going to be a wonderful hour that we have with author Stephanie Harrison. So I highly recommend, you reach out and tell kind of friends and family, hey, take a look at this book. It's called New Happy. And it's going to be a great event, and we really want to share it with our whole community. So again, welcome to Book Passage and to our virtual events. Book Passage is a wonderful community spot for those of you who visit us in the store. Thank you. We've got our two locations here in Corte Madera, and we also have our San Francisco Ferry building. And we have these incredible events going on all the time. We've got virtual events, in-person events, off-site events. All of it is on our website, bookpassage.com. Take a look at that frequently. We don't want you to miss any of the exciting and wonderful events that we have going on all the time. And we're so proud to bring you this programming. We pride ourselves on presenting different and often less mainstream voices, books that might change your perspective on the world, books that can often change your life. And this afternoon is no exception. We're thrilled to share New Happy. You hold the book up. Here it is, by Stephanie Harrison. This book is receiving rave reviews from both critics and readers alike. A next big idea must read, a Zibby summer read pick, 5-star ratings on Goodreads, an Oprah Daily recommendation, and a staff favorite at Book Passage. Through an inspiring blend of art and science, New Happy will forever change the way you see yourself and the world. Stephanie Harrison does a wonderful job of intertwining her own personal experiences, the experiences of others, and making us see how we can use all of these examples to change our thinking and our actions to become our truer self and a happier self. Stephanie Harrison is the creator of New Happy philosophy and an expert in the science of well-being. Her company, The New Happy, teaches millions of people around the world how to be happier every day. She has a master's degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she was later an instructor. And previously, she was head of learning at Thrive Global, where she directed the development of science-based programs for the well-being that reaches millions of employees at Fortune 500 companies all around the world. We are so thrilled to have this star in the world of books and self-help. Please give a very warm welcome to Stephanie Harrison.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here with you. And Book Passage, I lived in San Francisco for 8 years. It was my favorite bookstore, so the honor is all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. And this is one of those books that make my job so enjoyable, because if I can get this book into the hands of one of our customers, I just know it's going to have a huge impact on them. Why don't we start with, why don't you tell us, Stephanie, the main difference between Old Happy and New Happy, and how Old Happy kind of warped our understanding of overall happiness?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting findings from my research is this idea that happiness as a goal drives everything that we do. And what that means is that if you imagine that there's almost like a chart that you're trying to reach with happiness at the very, very tip top, and you're trying to inch your way up through all of the choices that you make in daily life. So, what happens then if you have a flawed understanding of happiness is that it ends up affecting all of the choices that you make on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis. And ultimately, that can take you not towards the destination that you're thinking of, but a very, very different one. So I argue that there's this concept, which I call old happy, which is society's definition of happiness and the ways that we've been socialized to believe in it, the way that we're incentivized and pushed to pursue certain things, the ways in which we are conditioned to see ourselves and others in the world. And old happy tells you that you're not good enough as you are, that in order to prove that you're good enough, you have to achieve all of these specific societally approved goals, and that you have to do everything by yourself because you're separate from other people. And what was probably the most important discovery for me on this journey of studying happiness is that these things don't make us happy. They make us miserable, but we think that we're working towards something that we want, and ultimately we end up trapped in this very vicious cycle.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting was kind of how the book talks about this, how individualism is such a core value in our society. And, that kind of leads to self-interest. And
Mhm.
then, it's kind of taught in schools. So can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how, how can we change that?
Yeah, individualism teaches us that, the self is the most important unit. It's the single most powerful thing. And even when we think about a lot of the dominant discourse in self help and personal development, it's all very, very self focused. It's all about becoming better as a person or getting what you want or pursuing the things that matter most to you. And we tend to just ignore the fact that we are social beings who are innately connected to one another, that we're shaped constantly by every single interaction that we have, the environment that we're in, the broader forces that are occurring in our society at every given moment. It's like we want to isolate ourselves, and we think that that will lead to well-being and happiness. But in fact, we know from extensive research that the more connected you are, the happier you are. And so I think one of the first steps that we need to take is to stop looking at ourselves through this lens of, Cheryl, you're separate from me and I am separate from you and we don't have anything in common, or your well-being is disconnected from mine, or our goals are at opposite ends of the spectrum, or even at odds with one another. We have to start looking at one another and seeing how am I connected to you? What is it that we have in common? What is it that we both have experienced, the challenges that we've gotten through, the goals that we're striving for, even at the very end of the day? We always have something in common because we're both human and we're both seeking to live a happy and a good life. And that's what connects all of us.
Yeah, the interconnectedness is I think that's something that people can really understand, and I
Mm.
hope that that's an important takeaway from the book. Um, what three questions do we need to ask ourselves in order to get to a happier place?
So my argument is that we develop this old happy worldview, a way of seeing the world. And it teaches us to answer these three questions in a very specific way. So the first question that we need an answer to is, who am I? And Old Happy tells you that you're not enough. There's something wrong with you. You're lacking. You're bad. You're broken. Some variant of that. I think we can probably all relate to hearing in our own heads, or maybe from the people in our lives, or from the broader world. The second question that we need an answer to is, what should I do? What do I do every day? How should I direct my life? What are my values? How do I live a life in this world that we live in? And Old Happy tells you that you must achieve these expected outcomes. So those outcomes could vary depending on your family, your culture, your specific own goals, the ways in which you've been conditioned. But very often it's manifesting as there's this path that you have to follow. You have to go through life's checklist of doing all these things in the right way at the right time and proving that you're good enough from it. And then the third question that we need an answer to is, how am I connected to others? And Old Happy's answer is, you're not connected to anybody, you're on your own. And it's those three beliefs that ultimately end up driving our decisions and our pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, that drive to be perfect.
Mm.
I certainly know that one.
Me
And
too.
you talked about how it can really create burnout within parents, and you've got some research on this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So, this pressure to be perfect is the way that we try to compensate for not feeling good enough. So we just think, oh, if I can perfect myself in whatever way I'm supposed to, then I'll prove that I'm finally worthy. And then when you couple that with individualism of having to do it all on your own, you end up with this recipe for a great deal of pain. And one of the ways in which we see that manifesting is through parents, particularly in the United States, where we have no kind of social safety net, we have no paid leave. We teach parents that they need to do everything by themselves and that they have to meet this standard of the perfect parent in order to show how worthy they are. And what happens is that leads to something that's called parental burnout. And when you experience parental burnout, you stop being able to take joy from any aspects of parenting, from the love and connection and the delight in watching your child grow and develop. And then that makes it incredibly hard to sustain the responsibilities that also go with being a parent, of having to navigate all the challenges and the sicknesses and the needs of your child. And ultimately, what happens is parents end up disconnecting from their children, and that profoundly hurts both parties that are involved. And so as we are set up and we're put in this position where we're given an impossible brief to try and fulfill. And I guess for me, as I was writing this, I wanted to call that out and say, like, this is an impossible set of standards we put on people, and we shouldn't be striving for it. We should be trying to think about what a more realistic and compassionate way to treat ourselves is, while simultaneously also advocating for systemic changes that would make this make things easier for people.
Yeah, I do think that is a really interesting point, and you know, hopefully people will get that message. And a lot of parents out there are frustrated and unhappy, and I hope that they can kind of change their thinking. I know your book will help do that, help kind of change how they focus. There was one little simple thing that I liked. You use the word "we" a lot. And can you talk about how just shift, this is such a small thing, but I think it can make such a big difference. Just how shifting to use the word "we" instead of the use the word "I" can often bring about just a sense of calm. And
Mm.
again, that's like just this really small thing that can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. There's this amazing group of studies that have been done by psychologists, I believe, some of them from the University of Michigan, if I'm remembering correctly. And they have discovered that these very simple tweaks in our language can profoundly change not only the way that we see ourselves and others, but also the way that we treat them and engage with them. And so when we shift and we say things like, we're having a hard time, or we're facing a big challenge, or we both want this, what happens is it brings those you and the other person mentally together in a way, and it sort of shrinks that sense of separation that individualism engenders within us. um, and so I think probably I wasn't consciously trying to use the word we a lot in the book, but I think because so much of the book is about trying to connect people with our common humanity, it hopefully does a little bit of that as well, in terms of shrinking that distance that we perceive between us.
Yeah, again, I love when you can provide people with just really small little, easy changes, but that have a really large impact. And I just think that's one of them. And I myself, I'm going to certainly try and kind of use that in my everyday life.
Mhm.
There's something that I really liked. I'm going to pull the book out here on page 107. Let me pull that out. Um, you've got, let me see, I'm right here. Maybe that's not the right page. There's a toolkit
Mm.
that you have. And I just thought the toolkit was really interesting. Can you read that?
Yeah, of
Got the
course. Let
right
me
page
open my
here.
book. Yeah, I have it on page 107 too. So a large part of this philosophy of happiness is about the idea that happiness comes from helping other people, and that's what we're here for. That true happiness is the result of being who we are and giving of ourselves in ways that improve the well-being of others. And so one of the barriers that researchers have identified as getting in the way of that is that we don't know how to help, we don't know how to get started, we don't know what good help can look like. And so with this toolkit, I wanted to put together simple and relatively I think almost all of them are free or very minimally cost to help other people. So it's called the Help Now Toolkit. So I say, here's an excerpt, read through the list, choose one, or come up with your own, and then put this book down and go do it. Loved ones, call a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Send a note to someone telling them how you appreciate them. Help your family or roommate with a chore. Work. Write a kind email praising someone's work. Try to turn someone's day around through kindness. Drop off extra food for a colleague going through a hard time. Community. Call a store or business that you have benefited from to thank them. Knock on a neighbor's door to check in. Reach out to someone you admire and let them know how they've influenced you. World. Smile at a stranger. Sign a petition on change.org. Speak up about a cause that matters to you.
Yeah, I love it. Just such simple things. Do you recommend, like, do you have like this printed out and like on your refrigerator, or do you have friends
Yes.
that have done that?
Yeah, so I have all of these printables because I guess being a very visual person, I need those little cues in my life, you know what I mean? So I have it printed out and I also have a little note on my phone, which I think is probably the precursor to this toolkit, which I have titled When You're Having a Bad Day, Look at This. And it's a bunch of ways that I can go out and help other people, and it never ever fails me.
Yeah, again, you mentioned visual. Can you talk? I mean, the book is so beautiful with all the different art that you have in there. Something that I didn't expect when I just started to read it. Can you talk about how why you put that in and what it means to you?
Yeah, so when I was first starting my company, The New Happy, I wanted to come up with a way of communicating this new philosophy in a new way and trying to reach people. And I think personally, I have been deeply, deeply affected and changed by books, like I'm sure you have, and I'm sure everyone listening. Books have changed my life a million times over. But so much of the predominant ways that we communicate on the internet, where people spend so much of their time, comes in like these kind of short quips or sound bites. And I don't personally get as much out of that. I don't find that they help me to change in the same way or to internalize a truth or really understand something, not in the way that picking up a book would ever affect me. And so I wanted to think about, like, was there a way that I could communicate these ideas in a way that would stick with people or help them to understand in a new way and be almost an educational tool that wasn't dependent upon me having to write like a long chapter or write a whole book at that point in time, but just sharing little moments of it. And so I started making this artwork, basically taking a finding from a study or from a body of research and then figuring out how to communicate it in these very, very simple ways using simple shapes and colors and very minimalist approach. And I was amazed because people really, really connected with it. I never imagined that would happen. I always just thought it was like these weird little pictures I was making. But to my surprise, people really connected with the representations. And so when I was making the book, I wanted to include some of that artwork to be able to also reach people who feel connected through visuals or through are able to better understand concepts and recognize them. And I think that the way that we tried to do it was that every few pages there's a piece of art that tries to emphasize one of the most important concepts so that you really get it in a different way, and hopefully it solidifies your understanding.
Yeah, I just love it because again, like I'm gonna try and show. Let me see if I can. I've got a like here's like just a one of the art pieces, and as Stephanie said, like like every few pages there's different. Can I get that up there? Yeah, there we go. Sort of. There's different just beautiful pages of artwork, and not all of us, we all learn differently, so that's just another element that can kind of like solidify some of these lessons and points that some of us get it through words, language, and others through visual representation. So
Yeah.
it's really nice to have both of those in the book, and it just adds to the beauty of the book. So well done.
Thank you.
Great. Um, can you address the importance of asking for help? I know that many of us I know that's key and I know that's important, but oftentimes, again, in our society, that's seen as a weakness. You're not supposed to ask for help. But can you tell us about your research and how that's so important?
Yeah, I found this study, unfortunately, after I had already submitted the book
Mhm.
because it was so, so perfect. But, anyways, I'll put it in the next one. That said that by the age of 7, children are afraid to ask for help because they are worried of being perceived as weak. And gosh, it just broke my heart, right? Like,
Mhm.
kids should never worry about being seen as weak or unacceptable in those ways, but it's a manifestation of old happy culture, which celebrates dominance and individualism and achievement and perfection. And this makes it very, very difficult for people to request help from others. And so, if you're somebody who struggles to ask for help, I would first tell you that it's not your fault. It's because of the culture that you've been raised in, and that has conditioned you into a set of beliefs about how you need to behave in order to be worthy and good enough. And I hope that that can help you to lessen the pressure on yourself and maybe stop beating yourself up, because that doesn't work. It doesn't make it any easier to beat yourself up for struggling with something. The best way to grow is to be kind and compassionate to yourself when you're doing something different. Um, I think that one of the most important ways that we start to figure out how to ask for help is tuning into our own needs. Most of us have become very disconnected from those needs. It becomes very difficult to identify what it is that we need help with. And unfortunately, that's sort of our responsibility, is to identify, okay, here is what I'm struggling with, or a need that perhaps isn't being met in the ways that I want it to be. And once I know that, I can start to go out and request it from people who love me and who are in my life. So one of the tools that I recommend is creating something called a signal list, which is a list of signals that you are struggling with something and that you need help. Because for so many of us, we're used to just denying our needs and pushing them away. And what happens is, the more that we do that, the not only are we like making it harder for ourselves because we're not getting the help that we need, but we're also making it much more likely that eventually we'll ignore our pain enough and it'll create a massive challenge in our lives that will take a lot more work and effort to clean up. Like, I have talked to so many people who, for example, have struggled with their mental health, and they just ignored the signals until they became too great to ignore. So tuning into those little moments that indicate, hey, I'm feeling really tired all of the time. Like, maybe that's something that indicates that I'm in need of something. And what is it that I need from this? And then starting to figure out how you can ask for help and lean on others. And the more that we can bring that attunement to what's going on within us, the more that we can then rely on the people outside of us.
Yeah, and can you also talk about how allowing someone to help you is actually that you call it the helping paradox, but allowing someone to help you is actually giving them an opportunity to achieve some happiness.
Yeah, yeah, we talk about helping like, "Oh, I don't wanna be a burden, I don't wanna get in your way, I don't wanna cause problems for you." But that only is true if you believe that helping is something that is harmful. And in fact, what I hope to do with this book is to prove to people that helping is one of the very best things that you can do for yourself. It's one of the most beneficial things that you can do for your own happiness and well-being. So, if you struggle to lean on other people, but you would like to live more in alignment with the tenets of these ideas, you have to recognize that when you are asking somebody for help, you're giving them a chance to be happy. You're giving them a chance to feel like they're contributing to your lives, that they're making a difference. You're giving them a purpose. You're giving them a sense of joy. You are giving them these beautiful, beautiful chances at happiness. You're not a burden. You're the opposite. You're a gift. And I think that the more that we can recognize that and live in that way, the more possibilities we have to build a world where people really start to treat one another in that way at a global level.
Yeah, I just love that. I really do because we are not conditioned to think that way. As you said, you don't want to ask for help. You don't want to appear weak, and then you don't want to ask for help because you don't want to burden someone. But as your research shows, that's just not the case. That you are if you do ask for help, you're going to be happier, and then you're allowing somebody else to find more gratification.
Exactly. And it's like, it's so silly. It's almost like I've been so fascinated by this because I've always wondered, like, where did this lie originate about helping? Like, where did it really come from? And what is so interesting to me is the idea that, like, we can do anything on our own. Like, anything that we do is dependent upon other people. We are always leaning on help and support from others. And it's like we've collectively decided to have amnesia about that, and that we just want to ignore that it's the case and pretend we do everything on our own. But the more that we can recognize our dependence upon one another, I think the more opportunities we see to say, wow, like, look how much I'm getting. Look how much other people are helping me. And I want to contribute to give back in that same way because I know that I'm connected to people and we are together a part of something.
Yeah, I hope this book can change people's view on that because I think that's such a critical point. There was one kind of along this line. There was one sentence that just really struck me in the book. And it goes something like this: presence of struggle does not mean something is wrong with your life. It means you're human. And I, again, one of these, a simple phrase that I think can really resonate with people and hopefully kind of shift their mindset. And maybe talk, can you address that? And, again, I know you've got research behind this. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I used to believe the opposite. I used to believe that if I had any problems in my life or struggles or pain, that it meant that I was flawed and bad, and then reinforce that belief, that old happy belief that we talked about earlier. And all that belief does is makes you think that you have to overcome your humanity. You have to somehow become this perfect robot who never ever experiences difficulties and challenges. And it's basically the quickest way to having a deeply destructive relationship with yourself, because any time that you struggle, you then beat yourself up and say, "Oh God, this is proof that I'm no longer good enough." And I have to get back to achieving and proving myself and winning in life's competition, which then brings you right back into this rat race of unhappiness and misery. And it's so deeply ingrained within us, this idea that suffering means that you are flawed, that it can be a process, I think, to sort of peel back the layers of how that's affected us and recognize that there's no need to judge ourselves so brutally, and that it's counterproductive if we want to experience any form of well-being, and that it makes us far worse friends, family members, colleagues, community members to have that belief, because we end up projecting it upon other people as well. And I think part of part of this realization for me came because the whole time that I was writing this book and building my company and sharing this philosophy with people, I was going through really, really difficult times in my own personal life where my husband was suffering from a very serious illness and I had to become his full-time caregiver. And so every day I was living with the presence of both like that pain and then also the joy and the connection and the creativity. And it just became clearer and clearer to me that the two are not opposites. They are both a part of living a happy life. And in fact, real happiness is possible even in the face of great pain, of great struggles, of great suffering. But you have to make sure that you're pursuing the right kind of happiness to be able to live in that way.
I just love that because I just think that's so key. And I just did an event with an author who wrote about grief and
Mm,
deep grief, and that was her book, was trying to help people come out of that.
mm,
Um, and again, one thing that was interesting was that grief doesn't go away, but you can learn to still be happy. You can live with both of those things. And that's kind of what you're saying too. Yes, we all have struggles, but yet that doesn't mean that you have a bad life or you're a bad person. You can still, like as you said, it is being human. And so young people need to learn to, kind of live with both of those things, accept their struggles. And it kind of brings to mind what do you think about social media? Oftentimes, I've got nieces and nephews and they're in their teen years, and they say to me, "Oh, so and so's life is so perfect, and I wish my life was like that, and I'm not like that." And so I think that what is your research saying to you about how the social media kind of the perfect life impacts
yeah.
younger people?
I think that the best way I think to think about social media is that it's a tool that, like any other tool, depends upon the person who is wielding it, and more broadly, us as a collective who are wielding it. And so, for me, social media is a very interesting case study in old happy, because it shows us how it not only presents but also how it replicates.
Mm.
So, for example, in what you're describing, like if I believe, because of old happy culture, that any suffering or challenges in my life make me less than, then I'm not going to publicly share about them, right? Because that would indicate to people that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. So instead, I'm going to highlight all of the great stuff that I've bought or all of the successes that I've earned and promote these more societally approved forms of personal representation. And then, to your point with your nieces and nephews, that then leads other people to perceive themselves and to view themselves in comparison to that as, oh, I'm not good enough. But all of this is because we have a foundational worldview problem. We have a foundational problem with our culture. And so we could choose to use social media in different ways. And there are many people out there who are trying to do that. I know that a lot of my work is delivered through social media, and I've tried to approach it in a very new, happy way in order to avoid making people in order to avoid entrenching those cultural values that I want us to move away from. There are lots of ways to use it that are focused on connection and community and compassion and kindness and everything that we want. But right now, because old happy is so prevalent, we're sort of ignoring those, and the other forces are just too strong. But for example, like one of the things Old Happy teaches us is that your self worth is defined in comparison to another person. So you're not worthy by yourself. You're worthy about how you stack up in comparison to the people next to you or around you or the ones you see on social media. And so if you log on and you see somebody like off on this fabulous vacation or living this seemingly perfect life, then your self esteem plummets, even though nothing has fundamentally changed about who you are as a person. And even starting to bring awareness to those emotional experiences that you have within you to see, oh, I logged onto social media and now I feel like I'm not good enough. Like, isn't that interesting how that manifests? And so I think that we need to both have more systemic changes to the ways in which social media platforms are designed and the ways in which they promote certain content and individuals over others, but we also need like a values revolution in the way that we're approaching using it.
I agree. I agree. Well, and I'm glad you're using it for good, and I know you
I
are,
try. I try.
and that's greatly appreciated. One thing I also liked, and I'm kind of switching gears here, is you talk about kind of make a note as an individual, make a note to yourself about all the people who are helping in the world. And you can kind of see their generosity to, and if you just kind of pay attention to that, and again, like maybe tack it up on your mirror or whatever, um, that can kind of bring you some quiet joy. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's so easy, especially right now, I think, to feel helpless about the state of the world, to feel like, gosh, there's just so much pain and division and violence and fear and all of these horrible things. Um, but we don't notice in the same way the beautiful things that people are doing to try and address those pains or to make the world better. Um, and if we don't see those people out there, if we don't pay attention to them, then it becomes very hard to sustain our own hope and our energy and zest for trying to make the world better. So, one of the practices that I recommend is paying attention and mentally noting to yourself every time you see someone do something good. So, like you're walking through downtown and you see somebody hold a store or help pick up somebody's bags after they dropped them, or, you see a beautiful piece of art that somebody made hanging in a gallery. Like there are millions and billions of little acts of goodness that are happening out there. And the more that we can start to notice them, the more inspired we become to want to do our own good acts and to contribute to that. And moreover, I think we have a responsibility to do that because there are people out there who, in my case, I know that I'm a very privileged and fortunate person. I have many, many things that other people don't have access to simply not through any effort or any sort of like worthiness of my own, but just through dumb luck and circumstances. And I have a responsibility to be the evidence for goodness in the world for people who are struggling, for people who are having a hard time. And I really view that as my job in life is to go out and try and do as much good as I can because hopefully that will reach somebody when they need it and then it'll inspire them in ways to contribute. And I think that if we had that mindset of trying to do these acts of goodness versus the mindset of old happy, which is trying to elevate ourselves above others and prove how good we are, we would have a very different world.
Yeah, Stephanie, on page 134, you talk about Mary Oliver's poem, Song of the Builders. And I was wondering if you could just read that last paragraph because
Yeah.
it kind of encapsulates what you just described. And I just think it's so beautiful. And I'm so glad you included that. Again, it's so simple, but yet it kind of describes the importance of looking for the good in the world.
Yeah, gosh, Mary Oliver is a true angel of goodness. I desperately if anyone's watching, you should look up the actual poem after this. I wasn't able to include it because of permissions, but it's so lovely. In Mary Oliver's poem, Song of the Builders, she describes sitting on a hill and watching a cricket slowly breaking down organic matter. That's the cricket's unique role in our ecosystem, and the whole world relies on it to bring those nutrients back into the earth. Oliver implores us to remember that we all have our own inexplicable way to contribute to the world around us.
Yeah, I just love that because it's such a simple thing that we just take for granted. And
Yeah.
and I like how you make us as people remember that it doesn't have to be a big gesture. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a big gesture to, bring happiness to yourself and make the world a happier place. It can be something very small.
It's so true. Like there was this I ended up not including this story in the book, but it's a moment that I've always remembered, which was back in 20, I think it was 2019. I was living in the Bay Area, but driving up to San Francisco from my where I was living in the South Bay. It was, like a long hour commute. And my partner Alex was really sick. He was bedbound. I was working full time at a really demanding job. I had to, cook and clean and be a caregiver and all of these things. It was just a really difficult time for me. And um, I remember one day I was driving home, and as I was kind of pulling into my street, I was like, "Oh God, it's garbage day tomorrow. I have to take the garbage out." And it was just like one thing too many, like we had this really long driveway, and I was doing like 100% of the chores, and I was just exhausted, and I just felt like I can't do this. Like it was one thing a little too far or whatever, and I started like crying in my car, just thinking like I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm going to get through this day even. And as I pulled into my street, I saw that my neighbor had brought our garbage cans out. They had just done it for me as an act of kindness. And so I obviously started crying even more, thinking about how lovely that was that they took the time to do that. And I called her and I just was bawling on the phone, being like, "You have no idea how much this means." And she was like, "It's not a big deal. Like, I know you're going through a lot and you have so much on your plate. Like, let me help you. Let me do this." And I have never, ever, ever forgotten that moment because it probably didn't feel like a big deal to her, but it was such a big deal to me. And that's what we all have the power to do for one another.
It's a great story. I can relate to that. That's very beautiful. Um, Another thing that's so important to find true happiness is kind of trying to find out what you're good at and then
Mm,
pursuing that. And you say, this is a quote, our gifts should bring us joy.
mm,
And I often like I've got three daughters in their 20s, and one loves her job, the other two do not.
mm,
And they always say, well, I want to find it. What am I good at? How can I find my true gifts? And
mm,
I love how you mention that, like our gifts should bring us joy.
mm,
And you also write, like, to uncover your talents, you try as many new things as you can. And when you feel a spark, explore more. And
mm.
I think that is absolutely great advice. I hope that we've got a lot of young people watching this or will watch this because I think that is such a wonderful way to really help young people try and find what their true talents are. So can you talk about that? Because I think that is just a really, really important part of this book and something that can, resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, everyone wants to be good at something, right? Like we all want to have a talent, something that we can do, that we can experience mastery through. But as you're saying, it's really hard to find a talent sometimes, especially if you don't have the right support. One of the most interesting things I discovered in my research is that if you look at the most acclaimed, famous creators, athletes, artists, anyone else who we hold in this great esteem, pretty much all of them had a unique advantage in being born into an environment that helped them to discover that spark or to have parents who helped them to identify it. So, for example, Leonardo da Vinci, his dad was part of the elite in their city, and he set him up at a workshop when he was, like 9 years old. And so, of course, if you have a natural talent for art, and then you go into this workshop with the most revered artist of Florence, you're gonna become pretty good. You're gonna learn a lot of skills. And meanwhile, the rest of us are looking at these talented people and thinking, like, what's wrong with me? I want to do something like this, but I don't know how to do it, or I don't have the support, or whatever it is. And so my counsel here is to try and replicate that experience for yourself. And you can do it at any age, at any time. Talents can be developed for your entire life. Um, and the way to do that is, as you said, to figure out something that sparks you. Like, what are you curious about? Whose life do you look at and think, wow, I wish I could live their life? What passions did you have when you were a little kid that you've abandoned? Where are your hopes leaning you towards? And then once you've identified that spark, you have to put yourself into what's called a flow state in order to develop the skills and talents to develop it. And flow is something that you might have experienced before. It's where you feel like you're merged with the activity that you're doing. Um, if you haven't experienced it, one of the best ways to think about it is like if you've ever played a sport, or you've been you've engaged in physical activity, it's one of the easiest entry points. I grew up being a skier, and there would be times when I would be skiing down the hill and I would feel like I was, transcending my body. I wasn't really me anymore, and I wasn't thinking about myself. And it's those states that help us to develop the talents and the skills to then become better and better at what it is that we're doing. So every talent is every person who has a talent pretty much does the exact same thing, but no one ever talks about it. And so I wanted to lay out this roadmap that anyone could follow if they want to pursue a talent or something that matters to them.
Well, it's kind of like the old adage, if you love what you're doing, it's not work, and I think when you can match your skills and your talents with your job, it's not it becomes your job is very easy. It's very
Yeah.
enjoyable.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about your background, how you got into this, because you're obviously here you are writing this incredible book, and your skills match where you landed. And how did you start in the corporate world, and how did you end up here?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you told me that this would be my job when I was 21, I never would have believed you. I probably would have thought, what a weird set of circumstances would have brought me here. And I guess I suppose that that's true. I started my career as a management consultant, wearing, you know, suits and high heels and carrying a briefcase, and traveling around the world to help companies solve their problems with HR and employee experience and well-being. And it was not the right fit for me. It's a it would have been probably a great option for somebody else, but again, it wasn't my spark. It wasn't what aligned with my true self. Obviously, given that I now like make pictures for my for my job. So after that, I ended up going to work at LinkedIn, which is when I moved to the Bay Area. And I felt like it was a job that got me a little closer to what I was really interested in, which was well-being. And it would give me the opportunity to learn new skills and to develop as a person and as an employee. And it was then that I decided to get my master's degree in positive psychology. So I did that while I was working full time. And it was at that point that I started to pursue these ideas that are written about in the book. I ended up writing my final capstone project at my degree on this topic, on how we needed to redefine happiness, and starting to put these ideas together. And then I graduated and I went back to my normal job working in product marketing. And had no idea what I was going to do with it. I didn't know how to share a philosophy with people. And I sort of floundered for a little while and then eventually started a weekly newsletter where I shared these ideas and I kept that up. Then I went to go work for Thrive, which was much closer to what I wanted to do, specializing in well being. So this whole time I was sort of like inching closer and closer to what I wanted and just trying to make steps that brought me um, a little bit towards what I wanted to do and what really excited me. And then eventually, with the onset of the pandemic, I realized that there was a opportunity for us to revisit the values that we had as a society, and maybe it was the right moment to share the new happy. And so I quit my job and started doing this full time. So it's definitely not a straightforward path. And I hope that if there's somebody out there listening thinking that their career doesn't make much sense, it's okay. My career didn't make much sense either, and you'll figure it out. You'll find your way.
No, I love that. And it's never straight line. And it's, you've landed in a great spot. Did you have like any mentors or like, because you do talk about, meet people and talk to them about what they do and, kind of look in your environment and see maybe that, look at somebody and say, oh, I'd like to do that person's job. Did you have anybody like that that you could
Yeah,
point?
I think I had mentors at my jobs at LinkedIn, people who really encouraged me to pursue what mattered to me. They were so supportive when, I was like, "Hey, I want to go do this degree and I like your support." They encouraged me to go on and keep doing it. I worked with amazing professors and researchers at Penn who taught me so much and pointed me in new directions. My partner is a former entrepreneur. And so when I wanted to take the leap, he encouraged me and gave me so much support and encouragement. Working for Ariana at Thrive, I learned so much from her about how to communicate these ideas and how to articulate concepts around well being in a way that really are meaningful to people who have a lot on their plate and busy jobs and responsibilities. So, yeah, at every step of the way, I got so much help from people who were generous enough to support me.
Yeah, well that's great. And I hope our listeners out there can also, hopefully find some mentors and
Yeah.
one thing that you talk about also is asking for feedback. But I love the way you frame how you recommend people do that instead of just saying um, you know, how am I doing? You're very specific. And if you don't mind reading on page 170, where it says ask for feedback, if you can maybe read the first two paragraphs, because again, I think these are like just little tweaks in language that can make a huge difference.
Ask for feedback. Make a list of 5 to 10 people who have witnessed you in action, whether at school, at a job, at home, or with your community. Ask them, what do you think my unique talents are? Or when have you seen me most alive? Try to get them to reflect your gifts to you the way you have learned to do for others. Avoid asking questions like, what job do you think I should pursue? Many people will jump straight to solutions or how they think you should fulfill your potential. But that's your job. You need to filter their answers through your own feelings, asking yourself, does this feel right to me?
I love that. Yeah. Again, this is your responsibility to try and figure out where your true talents lie. But asking someone, where did you see me alive? I love how that's phrased. And I think it really will make the other person think and
Uh,
hopefully provide some really good some good feedback.
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? How when you ask the right question, it can unlock these insights that are buried within people that you would never have access to otherwise, and they can change your whole life. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Well, again, the whole book is filled with little things that help you ask the right questions because that is key. And then kind of moving along, you talk about how wisdom comes from life experiences. And again, I'm going to ask you to read another quote because I just loved it. Let me find it here. Okay, on page 189,
Yeah.
you talk about it's it starts with the most beautiful people we have known.
Mm.
And it's a beautiful quote. And I was wondering if you could read that.
Yeah, of course. The psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, originator of the 5 stages of grief, once wrote, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen."
Yeah, I love that, and I think that again, it reminds us all that we're human and we have struggles, as you mentioned, and that just kind of adds to our character
Yeah.
and makes us the people that we are, and can make us beautiful.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, again, none of us would wish to suffer, and none of us would wish for others to suffer, but we can't eliminate it right now.
We
There's
all will,
nothing
and we all will.
there's nothing we can do. So, like, what do we do with the suffering? Like, how do we use it in some way to achieve our goals or to make us better?
Yeah. And let's kind of like we're let's kind of end with talking about just how staying connected is so important, and it's crucial for both individual and the collective well-being. Um, you do a lot of that in the book, and I think it is so excellent. So if you can just talk to us about, how we need to stay connected and how that's just critical to finding happiness.
I think if there's one takeaway I hope that people have from this book, it's that you're not alone and that together we can help one another to be happy. And I think perhaps it's like the message that I most needed to hear as a younger person as well. And I've come to believe it's also the message that our world most needs to hear as well in order to help us solve our challenges and problems. Because I think that what it does is it creates this recognition that we have to help one another. There's no way for us to do the things that we want to do by ourselves. And the more connected we are to each other, the more that we notice and sustain and contribute to those connections, the more happiness that we personally get to experience, but also the more happiness we get to create for other people and to give back to the world around us. And it's that sense of connectedness that ultimately is what will make it possible for us to build a world where everyone can be happy, where people can have their needs fulfilled, where people can get the support after they've gone through difficult times, where no one has to suffer or struggle unnecessarily. And um, it's that connectedness that has the power to bring us the joy that we want as well. So that would be my greatest hope, I think, from the book.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm going to hold the book up again. I hope that this book ends up into the hands of many high schools. I think every parent should have this book, and also our corporate friends out there. This is the type
Yes.
of book that can, make a huge difference and should be gifted to, all the employees out there from some of these big corporations that we have in the Bay Area. I hope that that is a possibility. This book is available on our shelves now. Let's see if we can see that. There we go. It's such a pretty cover. The New Happy. It is one of those critical books that, as we've been discussing this last hour, that, really small things that you can take away can make a huge difference in your overall well-being. And as we all, Stephanie points this out in the book, we all want to be happy. I mean, that is a human desire, and we all work towards that. Every decision we make in our life kind of leads to that. And this is one of those books that can give us a little bit of a roadmap, to help us get there. So I want to thank you, Stephanie, for really devoting your life and your career to helping us all and trying to make this world a better place, because following the steps in this book will lead to that. So we are so grateful. Your friends at Book Passage are just so happy that we had the opportunity to have you on our screen here today, and we can share it with all of our community. So just, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in, and come buy the book. We really hope that this book gets into the hands of our community.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for your generosity. You've made me so happy, and I'm so thankful for you.
All right. Well, we'll see you at Book Passage. Thank you so
Can't
much for
wait.
tuning in.